In the grim darkness of the far future, death is not always an ending. Sometimes it is merely a transformation into something far more terrible. Sometimes the greatest warriors are denied the peace of the grave and are instead condemned to fight on, not as men, but as machines. This is the fate of the Dreadnought pilots, those broken heroes who discover that their chapter's greatest honor is also its cruelest curse. Welcome back to Stories of Hammer. Today, we're exploring one of the most tragic and horrifying aspects of existence in the 41st millennium. We're delving into the reality of what happens when we fail, when our bodies are shattered beyond all repair, but the Imperium decides we're too valuable to let die. We're examining the walking tombs known as Dreadnoughts and the broken warriors entombed within them. The Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, are the Emperor's finest warriors. Enhanced far beyond normal human capability, they are living weapons forged in gene labs and tempered in the fires of endless war. They can survive wounds that would kill lesser men 10 times over. Their reinforced bones can withstand impacts that would pulverize normal skeletons. Their redundant organs ensure that even catastrophic damage might not prove immediately fatal. They heal at superhuman rates, fight through pain that would cripple mortals, and endure conditions that would destroy unaugmented humans in moments. But even these demigods of war are not truly immortal. Even space marines can be broken. A plasma blast to the torso that vaporizes organs even their redundant biology cannot replace. An orc warboss's power claw that severs the spine and crushes vertebrae into dust. A tyrannid bioweapon that dissolves flesh faster than even enhanced healing can counteract. A building collapse that crushes legs and pelvis beyond any hope of reconstruction. A demon's touch that withers limbs into blackened, necrotic tissue. In the brutal reality of the 41st millennium, there are countless ways for even a space marine to sustain injuries from which there can be no recovery. For most warriors, such wounds mean death, perhaps a death delayed by hours or days as apothecaries work desperately to stabilize the dying marine, but death nonetheless. The Emperor's peace, administered with dignity and the knowledge that the warrior served faithfully until the end. His gene seed would be harvested, implanted into a new recruit, and his legacy would live on in the next generation of battle brothers. His name would be inscribed in the chapter's rolls of honor, his deeds remembered in the librarium, and his sacrifice would be commemorated in the rituals and ceremonies of his brothers. But for a select few, death is not permitted. These are the warriors deemed too valuable to lose, too skilled to release, too knowledgeable to let pass into history. These are the heroes whose tactical acumen might turn the tide of battles yet to come, whose wisdom extends back centuries or even millennia, whose very presence inspires their brothers to heights of valor. For these warriors, the Imperium offers a different fate, not death, but something arguably far worse. They are offered the chance to become a Dreadnought. On the surface, this seems like the highest honor a chapter can bestow. To continue serving the Emperor beyond the natural limits of mortality, to fight on when the flesh has failed, to become a walking legend that will inspire generations of battle brothers yet unborn. The chapters frame it as a privilege, a sacred duty, the ultimate expression of dedication to the Emperor and the chapter. Chaplains speak in reverent tones of eternal service. Tech priests murmur prayers of gratitude to the machine god for the technology that makes such miracles possible. Young initiates listen to stories of ancient dreadnoughts and dream of one day achieving such legendary status. But the reality behind the ceremony and the religious rhetoric is something altogether more horrific. To become a dreadnought is to have everything human stripped away, piece by agonizing piece, until what remains is barely recognizable as the warrior who once bore that name. It is to be trapped in a prison of metal and ceramite, forever denied the simple pleasures that even space marines might enjoy. It is to watch centuries pass like days, To see everyone you ever knew crumble to dust while you endure, unchanging and undying. It is to slowly lose your grip on reality, your memories fading like old photographs left too long in sunlight, your personality eroding like stone beneath relentless waves. It is, in many ways, a fate worse than death. And yet, when a chapter master or an apothecary offers this fate to a dying warrior, refusal is not truly an option. The honor is too great, the duty too sacred, the pressure of centuries of tradition too overwhelming. And so the warrior agrees, or has the decision made for him, if he is too far gone to consent, and his transformation begins. What follows is not a gentle transition. There is no peaceful drift into mechanical existence. The process of creating a dreadnought is one of the most brutal procedures in all of Imperial medicine, a surgery that would be considered torture if performed on anyone other than a loyal servant of the Emperor. And it begins with a body that is already shattered beyond recognition, a broken shell that contains only the barest spark of life. The apothecaries arrive first, their faces hidden behind skull-faced helms, their movements precise and clinical. They do not come to heal. They come to harvest, to salvage, to strip away everything that is no longer necessary. The dying Marine is laid out on a surgical table, his ruined body a testament to the violence that brought him to this moment. Perhaps his legs are mangled beyond repair, bones protruding through torn flesh, muscles severed and nerves destroyed. Perhaps his arms are missing entirely, torn away by some Xenos, horror, or vaporized by energy weapons. Perhaps his torso is a ruin of shattered ribs and ruptured organs, held together only by the desperately administered surgery that kept him alive this long. It does not matter what specific injuries he has sustained. What matters is that he can no longer fight as a whole warrior, and so he will be made to fight as something else entirely. The surgery begins without anesthetic. Space Marines are trained to endure pain, their nerve endings modified to handle trauma that would drive normal humans into shock. But there are limits to what even their enhanced biology can withstand, and the process of preparing a body for interment in a dreadnought sarcophagus pushes far beyond those limits. The apothecaries work with cold efficiency, their hands steady as they make incisions that would be fatal to any other patient. They remove limbs that might be injured but not yet destroyed, reasoning that the dreadnought will provide better replacements than even the finest augmetics. They excise organs that are damaged but might have been saved with extensive surgery, calculating that the sarcophagus's life support will render them redundant anyway. The goal is not to save the Marine's body. The goal is to reduce him to the absolute minimum necessary to sustain consciousness and maintain neural function. Everything else is excess weight, unnecessary biological matter that will only complicate the integration with the dreadnought systems. And so the butchery continues, each cut and amputation bringing the warrior closer to the final configuration that will allow him to be sealed within his new shell. By the time the apothecaries finish their work, what remains barely resembles a human form. The warrior has been reduced to a torso, perhaps including the shoulders and upper arms, if they are in sufficient condition. The head remains, of course, for it contains the brain that will control the dreadnought. Most of the organs are gone, removed with surgical precision, and either discarded or preserved for study. What viscera remain are only those absolutely essential for life. Lungs to process the amniotic fluid that will fill the sarcophagus, a heart to pump blood through what remains of the circulatory system, the digestive organs modified to process the nutrient solution that will sustain the body in its new existence. The spine is critical and receives special attention. It must be intact enough to transmit neural signals, yet it must also be modified to interface with the dreadnought's command systems. Tech priests work alongside the apothecaries at this stage, their augmetic hands carefully implanting neural shunts and cybernetic interfaces directly into the vertebrae. These devices will serve as the bridge between the Marine's organic nervous system and the dreadnought's mechanical sensors and controls. Each implant is a point of connection and a point of agony, as the warrior's nerves are spliced into circuits and his flesh is married to metal. Throughout this entire process, the Marine remains conscious. Space Marines are trained never to surrender to unconsciousness, to maintain awareness, even in the face of catastrophic trauma. This training becomes a curse during the interment process, as they are forced to experience every cut, every implant, every violation of their flesh. They feel the cold bite of surgical instruments as limbs are amputated. They sense the intrusion of foreign objects as neural shunts are driven into their spine. They experience the nauseating wrongness as their sensory organs are disconnected from their original nerve pathways and rewired to interface with mechanical systems. Some Marines scream during this process. Others maintain a stoic silence, their transhuman willpower allowing them to endure without outward expression of pain. A few even attempt to pray, their lips moving in silent litanies to the Emperor, even as their bodies are systematically dismantled. But all of them, without exception, know that they are experiencing something that will forever change what it means to be themselves. The person who enters the surgery is not the same as the consciousness that will eventually awaken within the Dreadnought. Once the biological preparation is complete, the tech priests take over entirely. The Marine's truncated form is carefully positioned within the armored sarcophagus that will become his permanent home. This is not the external shell of the Dreadnought. That will come later. This is the inner tomb, an armored box lined with life support systems and filled with the amniotic fluid that will preserve what remains of the warrior's flesh. The sarcophagus is smaller than most people imagine, barely large enough to contain the reduced form of even a heavily modified human torso. There is no room for movement, no possibility of changing position. Once sealed inside, the Marine will remain in the same curled posture for the rest of his existence, whether that existence lasts decades or millennia. The amniotic fluid begins to fill the chamber, rising around the warrior's body with clinical precision. It is cold, this fluid, far colder than anything the Marine has experienced before. It seeps into his wounds, his remaining orifices, flooding his lungs with a foreign substance that his modified biology must learn to process as if it were air. The sensation is akin to drowning, to suffocating, but the Marine's enhanced physiology adapts. His lungs begin to extract oxygen from the fluid, his body adjusting to this new method of respiration, even as his mind rebels against the wrongness of it all. Then comes the most crucial and most invasive part of the procedure, the connection of the neural interface system. The tech priests work with reverent care, their augmetic hands manipulating controls and making adjustments measured in micrometers. The warrior's exposed nerve endings are carefully aligned with the corresponding ports in the sarcophagus, each one a conduit through which signals will flow between organic tissue and mechanical systems. The optic nerves are disconnected from the eyes and spliced into visual sensors. The auditory nerves are severed and rerouted to mechanical audio pickups. Every nerve that once transmitted sensation from skin, from muscles, from organs, is cut away from its original endpoints and connected instead to the Dreadnought's sensor array. This is the moment when the Marine truly ceases to be a living creature in any conventional sense. His consciousness remains, his brain continues to function, his thoughts and memories persist. But his body, what little remains of it, no longer belongs entirely to him. It belongs as much to the machine as to the flesh. He can no longer feel his own heartbeat, cannot sense the rise and fall of his chest as fluid-filled lungs expand and contract. His proprioception, his inherent sense of where his body exists in space, becomes confused and distorted as the neural signals report contradictory information. His limbs are gone, yet the Dreadnought's weapon mounts send phantom sensations that his brain struggles to interpret as arms. The final step is the sealing of the sarcophagus. Heavy plates of adamantium are bolted into place, each bolt driven home with mechanized precision. The warrior hears the grinding of metal on metal, feels the vibrations through the amniotic fluid, and knows that he is being entombed. There is no exit, no escape, no possibility of changing his mind. The sarcophagus is designed to be opened only in the direst emergency, or after the Marine's final death, when his remains will be recovered for the last rites. For all practical purposes, the moment those final bolts are secured, the Marine's physical body ceases to exist as an independent entity. He has become part of the machine. The sarcophagus is then installed within the Dreadnought chassis itself, slotted into the armored torso like a heart into a ribcage. This is the body he will inhabit for the rest of his existence. A towering war machine standing anywhere from 3 to 5 meters tall, depending on the pattern. Its frame constructed of ceramite plates and adamantium reinforcements. Where once he had arms, he now has weapon mounts capable of carrying assault cannons, plasma cannons, missile launchers, or close combat weapons of devastating power. Where once he had legs, he now has massive hydraulic supports capable of bearing tons of armor and weaponry. Where once he had eyes, he now has an array of optical sensors, targeters, and Auspex scanners. The first activation is perhaps the most disorienting experience a Marine will ever face. The tech priests complete their final checks and recitations of the proper liturgies. Somewhere deep within the fortress monastery, in a chamber that echoes with the chants of servitors and the hum of ancient machinery, the Dreadnought powers up for the first time. Energy flows through circuits, reactors hum to life, and systems that have perhaps lain dormant for decades or centuries activate once more. For the Marine sealed within the sarcophagus, consciousness returns like a thunderbolt. The neural interface floods his brain with sensation, but these are sensations unlike anything he has ever experienced before. He tries to open his eyes, and instead finds himself perceiving the world through multiple visual feeds simultaneously. Forward-facing optical sensors, rear-mounted cameras, thermal imaging overlays, targeting reticules, range-finding data. He tries to move his hand and feels the grinding of servos as a massive power fist or weapons mount responds to the impulse. He attempts to speak and hears his voice emerge not from a throat and mouth, but from voxcasters, his words rendered in a mechanical rasp that sounds nothing like the voice he remembers. This is the moment when many newly interred dreadnoughts panic. The disconnect between their mental self-image and their new reality is simply too great. They thrash against their new constraints, attempting to move in ways that the dreadnought's body cannot accommodate. They scream, the sound emerging as distorted static through vox speakers, never designed for such expressions of anguish. They beg, in those first terrible moments, to be released, to be returned to their flesh, to be allowed the death that they should have received on the battlefield. But there is no release. The tech priests watch the diagnostic readouts with clinical detachment, noting when neural activity spikes beyond acceptable parameters, adjusting the nutrient mix in the amniotic fluid to introduce calming chemicals that will bring the Marine back from the edge of complete mental breakdown. Chaplains stand ready with words of faith and duty, reminding the newly awakened warrior of his oaths, his responsibilities, his sacred purpose. And slowly, over hours or days, the Marine begins to adapt. The panic subsides, the thrashing ceases, the pleas for release fade into silence. What emerges from this crucible is something new. Not quite the man who was, not quite a machine, but a hybrid consciousness that exists in the liminal space between flesh and steel. The Marine learns to interpret the flood of data from his senses, his brain gradually constructing a new sense of self that encompasses his mechanical body. He discovers how to control his new limbs, how to walk on legs that are pistons and hydraulics rather than muscle and bone, how to manipulate weapons that mass more than his entire original body once did. And he begins his new existence as one of the chapter's ancients, a living weapon to be deployed when the need is great and put into storage when it is not. The technology that makes dreadnoughts possible is ancient beyond reckoning, its origins lost in the mists of humanity's long history. The first proto-dreadnoughts emerged during the dark age of technology, That legendary era when humanity reached heights of advancement that the Imperium of the 41st millennium can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. These early walking war machines were different from their modern counterparts, their exact appearance and capabilities lost to time, but they established the fundamental principles that would survive the age of strife and be rediscovered during humanity's rebuilding. By the time of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor walked among men and his primarchs led vast fleets to reclaim the galaxy for humanity, Dreadnought technology had already become standardized across the nascent Imperium. The patterns developed during this golden age, the Contemptor, the Dreadnought, the Leviathan, represented the pinnacle of what could be achieved when Mars and Terra worked in concert. When the Mechanicum's technical knowledge was wedded to the Emperor's vision of human ascendancy. These machines were marvels of engineering, combining durability with firepower, mobility with protection, in configurations that would set the standard for 10,000 years to come. The most common Dreadnought pattern in the 41st millennium is the Castroferum, also known as the Mars pattern Mark V. This is the boxy, angular war machine that most citizens of the Imperium would recognize if they were fortunate, or unfortunate, enough to see one in person. Designed to be relatively low and compact, the Castroferum was optimized for combat in confined spaces like starship corridors, tunnel systems, and the dense urban environments that characterize so much of Imperial warfare. Its thermic reactor, while less powerful than those found in older patterns, has the advantage of being more widely understood by the Mechanicum's tech priests, making maintenance and field repairs marginally more feasible. The Castroferum stands approximately 4 meters tall and mounts a formidable array of weaponry. One arm typically carries a close combat weapon, a power fist capable of crushing ceramite armor like parchment, or a power claw that can rend even the toughest materials. The other arm mounts a ranged weapon chosen based on tactical requirements, an assault cannon for shredding infantry, a las cannon for penetrating armor, a plasma cannon for versatility against multiple target types, or a multi-melter for close-range devastation. Additional weapons systems are often integrated into the chassis: storm bolters for suppressing enemy infantry, heavy flamers for clearing confined spaces, or missile launchers for indirect fire support. Despite being the most common pattern, the Castroferum is far from the most advanced. That distinction belongs to the Contemptor, an ancient design that dates back to the Great Crusade itself. Fewer than a dozen chapters possess the knowledge and materials to construct new Contemptor chassis, and those that exist are treasured relics maintained with religious devotion. The Contemptor is larger than the Castroferum, more heavily armored, and powered by an atomantic reactor whose construction secrets have been lost for millennia. These reactors generate far more power than their more modern equivalents, allowing the Contemptor to mount heavier weapons and more sophisticated targeting systems while maintaining superior mobility. The Contemptor's advantages extend beyond raw performance specifications. Its atomantic shielding provides protection against radiation and energy weapons that would cripple lesser patterns. Its advanced neural interface allows the interred Marine to control the chassis with a degree of precision and responsiveness that approaches, though never quite matches, natural movement. The machine's sophisticated machine spirit, if such a term can be applied to what is essentially an advanced AI system, works in harmony with the pilot's consciousness, compensating for the inevitable degradation of organic neural tissue over centuries of service. But the Contemptor's greatest advantage is also its greatest curse. Because these machines can be operated more effectively for longer periods, their pilots tend to remain awakened for extended durations. This accelerates the psychological decay that afflicts all Dreadnought pilots, exposing them to more combat trauma, more experiences of loss, more centuries of isolation compressed into fewer intervals of stasis sleep. Many Contemptor pilots burn out not mechanically, but mentally, their consciousness fragmenting under the weight of accumulated memories until the tech priests have no choice but to put them into permanent stasis. their wisdom lost, along with their sanity. The Leviathan pattern represents the opposite philosophy: maximum firepower and protection at the cost of almost everything else. These massive war machines, significantly larger than even Contemptors, were designed for the most brutal frontal assaults, for situations where the mission required breaking through enemy positions regardless of cost. Armed with weapons like storm cannons, grav flux bombards, or cyclonic melter lances, a Leviathan could lay waste to entire enemy formations or reduce fortifications to rubble with sustained fire. But operating a Leviathan exacted a terrible toll on its pilot. The neural load required to control such a massive and complex machine, combined with the intense sensory feedback from its devastating weapons, created psychological stresses that even Space Marine conditioning could barely withstand. Recent lore has clarified that Leviathan pilots experienced a gradual draining of their life force, their vitality siphoned away by the very machine they controlled. This was not merely psychological deterioration, but actual physical degradation, their remaining organic components withering and failing at accelerated rates even while sealed within their sarcophagi. Few Leviathan pilots served for more than a century before their bodies gave out entirely, their remains reduced to husks that the tech priests would inter in true mausoleums, rather than simply transferring to new chassis. Which brings us to the most recent and perhaps most controversial addition to the Imperium's Dreadnought arsenal, the Redemptor pattern developed by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl during his 10,000-year labor to create the Primaris Marines. The Redemptor is larger than the Castroferum, comparable in size to the Leviathan, and designed specifically to house the enhanced biology of Primaris Marines. It is a marvel of modern engineering, incorporating advances in reactor technology, neural interfacing, and weapons integration that make it one of the most effective Dreadnought patterns ever deployed. Its hyper-dense reactors generate power levels that allow the mounting of weapons like the Heavy Onslaught, Gatling Cannon, or Macroplasma Incinerator alongside an enormous Power Fist and additional supporting armaments. The neural links are so sophisticated that pilots report being able to control the Redemptor with a level of dexterity that previous patterns could never achieve. The machine responding to thought almost as quickly as a natural body would respond to neural impulses. And yet, for all these advances, the Redemptor embodies everything wrong with Cawl's approach to technology. In designing this pattern, the Archmagos prioritized performance over the well-being of the pilot, treating the interred Marine as just another component to be used and replaced when it burned out. The advanced neural links that provide such responsive control also expose the pilot's nervous system to feedback levels that organic tissue was never meant to endure. The powerful reactors, while generating unprecedented energy output, leak radiation and exotic particles that the sarcophagus's shielding can only partially contain. The result is a Dreadnought pattern that quite literally consumes its pilot. Marines interred in Redemptors experience an accelerated degradation that makes even the Leviathan's toll seem merciful by comparison. Their organic components wither and die at shocking rates, their life force drained away by the very machine that was supposed to preserve them. Within years, rather than centuries, Redemptor pilots are reduced to blackened husks, their organs little more than desiccated tissue, their brains barely functional enough to maintain minimal consciousness. The Mechanicum's response to this design flaw is characteristically pragmatic and horrifying. Rather than redesigning the Redemptor to better protect its pilots, they simply accept that sarcophagi will need to be replaced frequently. When a pilot burns out, his remains are removed and interred in a proper mausoleum, while a new wounded Marine is installed in his place. The machine itself is valued far more than the consciousness it contains. The ancient imperial belief that the individual matters less than their service taken to its logical and terrible conclusion. This disposability represents a fundamental shift in how at least some factions within the Imperium view Dreadnoughts. Where once they were treasured vessels preserving irreplaceable heroes, the Redemptor treats them as consumable ammunition, burning through pilot after pilot in pursuit of tactical effectiveness. It is a deeply cynical design philosophy, one that values immediate combat performance over the preservation of knowledge, experience, and heritage that previous Dreadnought patterns were built to safeguard. And yet chapters continue to use Redemptors because they work. On the battlefield, a Redemptor is devastatingly effective, capable of engaging multiple target types simultaneously, of closing with enemies at surprising speed, of weathering fire that would destroy lesser machines. Tactical commanders who need to break through fortified positions or eliminate high-value targets will request Redemptors without hesitation, knowing that the machine will deliver results even if the price is the accelerated death of its pilot. The physical specifications and mechanical capabilities of Dreadnoughts are impressive, certainly, but they tell only part of the story. To truly understand these walking tombs, we must examine what existence is like for the consciousness trapped within. We must look at the slow psychological destruction that awaits even the strongest-willed pilot, the gradual erosion of identity and memory that transforms heroes into haunted shells of their former selves. The most immediate and pervasive aspect of a Dreadnought's existence is isolation. From the moment the sarcophagus is sealed, the pilot is cut off from all normal forms of social interaction. He cannot shake a brother's hand in greeting, cannot share a meal in the chapter's halls, cannot train alongside his squad in the practice cages. His entire sensory experience is mediated through mechanical systems, filtered through sensors and projected onto his consciousness as data rather than true sensation. When the Dreadnought is active and deployed, this isolation is somewhat manageable. There are battles to fight, enemies to destroy, tactical decisions to make. The pilot's mind is occupied with the immediate demands of combat, his attention focused on target acquisition, threat assessment, ammunition management. He can communicate with his battle brothers through Vox channels, his mechanical voice joining the chorus of reports and battle cries that fill the communications network. In these moments, surrounded by the chaos of war, the pilot can almost feel like he is still part of the chapter, still a space marine rather than a weapon the space marines wield. But battles end. Enemies are routed or destroyed. The Dreadnought stomps back to the landing zone or the strike cruiser, its weapons powered down, its ammunition depleted. And then comes the moment every pilot dreads: the return to the fortress monastery and the descent into the deep halls where the chapter's Dreadnoughts wait between deployments. These chambers are places of profound silence, vast vaults deep beneath the monastery where dozens or sometimes hundreds of Dreadnought chassis stand in rows, their pilots sealed in stasis sleep. The air is cold, kept at temperatures designed to minimize power consumption by the life support systems. The only light comes from dim lumen strips and the soft glow of status indicators on each sarcophagus, pulsing in steady rhythms that mark the slow heartbeats and minimal neural activity of the sleeping pilots within. A tech priest will make the necessary adjustments, ensuring that the Dreadnought is properly secured in its designated alcove, that power feeds are connected, that the stasis field generators are functioning within acceptable parameters. The chaplain may speak a few words of blessing, commending the pilot's service and promising that he will be awakened when the chapter has need of his strength once more. And then they leave, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber, and the pilot is alone. The transition to stasis is not like natural sleep. There is no gentle drift into unconsciousness, no last thoughts before dreams take over. Instead, the stasis field activates with clinical precision, and the pilot's consciousness simply ceases. One moment, he is awake, aware, experiencing the minimal sensory input from his sarcophagus's internal sensors. The next moment, or what feels like the next moment, he is awakening to find that days, months, years, or even decades have passed in what seems like the blink of an eye. This temporal dislocation is profoundly disorienting. From the pilot's subjective perspective, he was just in combat, just fighting alongside brothers whose faces he knew, and whose voices he recognized. But when he awakens, those brothers may be long dead, their names already inscribed in the chapter's rolls of the fallen. The chapter master, who gave him his last orders, may have perished in battle and been succeeded by someone the pilot has never met. The very fortress monastery might have been rebuilt, expanded, or relocated to a different world entirely. Imagine experiencing this repeatedly over centuries. You fight in a battle, are put to sleep, and awaken to find that everyone you knew is dead. You fight again alongside a new generation of Marines, form new bonds, however limited they might be, return to stasis, and awaken to find that this generation too has passed beyond the veil. Again and again, the cycle repeats, each awakening bringing the realization that the world has moved on without you, that you are becoming increasingly disconnected from the living, breathing chapter around you. The psychological impact of this existence cannot be overstated. Humans are social creatures, even space marines who are conditioned to endure isolation and deprivation that would break normal men. We define ourselves in relation to others, construct our identities through our interactions and relationships. But a Dreadnought pilot is systematically denied these fundamental connections. He watches every bond he forms wither and die, every friendship end in loss, every connection to the chapter fade, as the Marines he knew are replaced by strangers who view him with awe and reverence, but not true familiarity. Over time, this isolation begins to erode the pilot's sense of self. Memories become confused, events from different centuries blurring together until it becomes difficult to remember which battle was fought when, which brothers fell in which campaign. The pilot starts to forget faces, names slipping away like water through clenched fists. He struggles to recall the sound of his own original voice, the feeling of his flesh and blood hands, the simple pleasure of eating food or feeling the warmth of sunlight on skin. Some pilots respond to this erosion by clinging desperately to their remaining memories, rehearsing them constantly during the brief periods when they are awakened, speaking aloud to themselves in the darkness of their sarcophagi to keep the words fresh. They recite the names of their fallen brothers like litanies, recount battles in meticulous detail, recall every word of conversations held centuries ago. This works for a time, but even these carefully preserved memories begin to fade. Details become fuzzy, timelines grow confused. The pilot finds himself uncertain whether a particular event really happened as he remembers it, or whether his recollection has been distorted by the passage of ages and the accumulated weight of too many other memories. Other pilots take a different approach, deliberately letting go of their past. They reason that holding on to what was will only bring pain, that the person they were before interment is effectively dead, and that their new existence requires a new identity. These pilots embrace their role as ancients, as living weapons rather than living men. They focus entirely on tactical knowledge, on the skills and experiences that make them valuable on the battlefield, while allowing their more personal memories to slip away. This approach has a certain cruel practicality to it. By discarding their humanity, these pilots avoid much of the psychological anguish that comes with remembering what was lost. But this solution carries its own terrible price. A Dreadnought pilot who has let go of his humanity, who no longer remembers what it was like to be a whole person with hopes and fears and relationships, becomes something cold and alien. He performs his function with mechanical precision, advises chapter leadership with tactical wisdom accumulated over centuries, and destroys the Emperor's enemies with ruthless efficiency. But he has ceased to be, in any meaningful sense, the person who was first sealed in that sarcophagus. He has become exactly what the most cynical critics claim dreadnoughts to be, a weapon that can think, but no longer truly lives. Perhaps most disturbing are those pilots who fall somewhere between these extremes, unable to fully let go of their past, but equally unable to hold on to it. These are the dreadnoughts who awaken confused and disoriented, who call out for brothers who died millennia ago, who cannot remember whether the war they are being awakened to fight is happening now or happened centuries past. Some become trapped in loops, their deteriorating minds unable to form new memories, causing them to experience the same confusions and realizations again and again with each awakening. The lore is full of examples of dreadnoughts whose mental states have degraded to the point where they are barely functional. Some require extensive rituals and recalibration each time they are awakened, tech priests and chaplains working in concert to reorient the pilot's fragmenting consciousness. Others can only be awakened for the briefest deployments before the strain of consciousness proves too much, and they must be returned to stasis. A few have descended so far into madness that they are kept permanently dormant, their tactical knowledge lost, but their physical shells preserved in the hope that some future development might restore their shattered minds. And then there are those like Murderfang of the Space Wolves, dreadnoughts who have gone completely feral. Whatever remained of Murderfang's original personality has been subsumed by an all-consuming rage, a fury so intense that it transforms him into a living weapon of pure destruction. The Space Wolves only awaken Murderfang when they need uncontrolled violence, when the tactical situation calls for a berserker fury that will not distinguish between enemy and ally. And as soon as the immediate threat is neutralized, Murderfang is drugged and put back into stasis before he can turn his claws on his own brothers. This is the nightmare at the heart of every dreadnought's existence. The knowledge that madness is not merely a possibility, but an inevitability. No matter how strong-willed the pilot, no matter how carefully the tech priests maintain the sarcophagus's systems, no matter how frequently or infrequently the pilot is awakened, the degradation will come. It might take centuries, it might take millennia, but eventually, every dreadnought will lose his grip on sanity, his mind fragmenting under stresses that no amount of conditioning or faith can indefinitely withstand. The only variable is how long it takes, and how gracefully the pilot manages his own deterioration. Yet despite all this horror, despite the isolation and the madness and the slow dissolution of identity, there are dreadnoughts who have endured for extraordinary lengths of time while maintaining their sanity and purpose. These are the legendary ancients, warriors whose names are known throughout their chapters, and sometimes across the entire Imperium. Their stories offer both inspiration and a sobering reminder of the price of such longevity. Foremost among these legends stands Bjorn, the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, the single oldest dreadnought in loyal service to the Imperium. Bjorn has walked the galaxy for more than 10,000 years, having fought alongside Lemon Russ during the Great Crusade and survived the horrors of the Horus Heresy. He is one of the very last individuals who personally knew the Emperor before his entombment upon the Golden Throne, one of the final living links to the Imperium's earliest days, when Primarchs led their legions and the dream of a unified humanity seemed achievable. Bjorn's longevity is unprecedented. Where most dreadnoughts begin showing signs of mental deterioration within centuries, Bjorn has maintained his clarity of thought and strength of purpose for 100 centuries. He remembers events that have passed from history into legend, can speak with personal authority about battles that the Imperium's scholars know only through fragmentary records. When Bjorn awakens and shares his recollections, entire generations of Space Wolves gather to listen, knowing they are hearing testimony from an era long lost. But even Bjorn's incredible endurance has its limits. As the millennia have accumulated, he spends longer and longer periods in stasis between awakenings. Where once he might have fought in several campaigns per century, now he sleeps for entire millennia, awakened only when the Space Wolves face their gravest threats or when his specific wisdom is absolutely required. The tech priests who maintain his sarcophagus work with religious devotion, aware that they are preserving perhaps the single most valuable living artifact in the entire Imperium. What keeps Bjorn sane when so many other ancients have fallen to madness? According to some accounts, it is anger. a cold, bitter fury that has burned within him since Leman Russ disappeared without explanation. Bjorn believes, or once believed, that Russ left him behind with the foreknowledge that his most trusted lieutenant would survive as a dreadnought, that this anger would keep him not only alive but sane, able to guard the Space Wolves through the generations when their Primarch could not. Whether this theory is true or merely a narrative Bjorn has constructed to give meaning to his suffering, the anger has served its purpose. It has given him something to hold on to, a core of identity that persists even as memories of his mortal life fade. But the price Bjorn has paid for this longevity is evident to anyone who speaks with him. His bitterness is palpable, his weariness profound. He is, in many ways, the loneliest being in the entire Imperium, a relic from an age when gods walked among men, surviving into an era where he no longer truly belongs. Every awakening brings fresh pain, as he is reminded that everything and everyone he loved has long since turned to dust. The Space Wolves revere him as the eldest, the true claw, the last of the company of Russ. But this reverence only emphasizes his isolation. They honor him as a legend, not knowing him as a person, because that person effectively died 10,000 years ago. Very different in character, but equally remarkable, is ancient Rylanor of the Emperor's Children, a warrior whose story exemplifies loyalty, carried to its ultimate extreme. Rylanor was interred in a Contemptor Dreadnought during the Great Crusade, serving his legion with distinction through countless campaigns. When the Horus Heresy erupted and the Emperor's Children fell to chaos under the corrupting influence of Slanesh, Rylanor alone, among his chapter's dreadnoughts, remained loyal to the Emperor. For 10,000 years, he endured on the plague-racked death world of Istvan III, surviving where no other loyalist had persisted, his faith in the Emperor undimmed, despite the utter corruption of the legion he had once served. When Fulgrim, the demon Primarch, whose failings had damned the entire Third Legion, finally returned to that cursed world, he found Rylanor waiting. The Ancient had discovered an unexploded virus bomb from the Istvan atrocity and had remained conscious through the millennia for one purpose alone: to detonate it in Fulgrim's presence, to wound the Primarch's pride, if not his demonic flesh. Rylanor's sacrifice achieved what a direct assault never could. Though Fulgrim's warp-spawned body survived the blast that consumed Istvan III, his pride was mortally wounded by the realization that even after 10,000 years, even corrupted into a demon prince, he could not command the loyalty of one of his own warriors. Rylanor died as he had lived, uncompromising in his duty and unbending in his faith, proving that some spirits cannot be broken, no matter how much the flesh has failed. Not all legendary dreadnoughts are defined by such extremes of endurance or sacrifice. Some are notable simply for maintaining their effectiveness and sanity over extended periods while serving their chapters faithfully. Ancient Tiberius of the Ultramarines is one such example, a warrior who has fought with his chapter for centuries, his wisdom sought by commanders who value his tactical insight. Unlike Bjorn with his bitter anger, or Rylanor with his consuming purpose, Tiberius represents a middle path, a dreadnought who has found a sustainable way to exist, who serves without losing himself entirely, who endures without descending into either madness or mechanical coldness. How Tiberius has achieved this balance is not fully documented, but the pattern suggests several factors. He is awakened regularly enough that he maintains continuity with the chapter's ongoing campaigns, yet not so frequently that the psychological strain overwhelms his ability to cope. He is encouraged to serve as a mentor and advisor rather than purely as a weapon, giving him a role that engages his mind rather than simply his destructive capacity. And perhaps most importantly, he is treated as a person rather than merely as a revered relic. His counsel sought not because he is ancient, but because he is wise. These legendary dreadnoughts offer hope that it is possible to endure, that madness is not inevitable, that a pilot can maintain his identity and sanity across centuries or even millennia of service. But they also highlight how rare such endurance is. For every Bjorn who survives 10,000 years, there are hundreds of dreadnoughts who descend into confusion or rage within a fraction of that time. For every Rylanor who holds on to his purpose through the ages, there are countless others whose original mission and identity have been lost to the relentless erosion of memory. And even these legends, impressive as their achievements are, cannot escape the fundamental tragedy of their existence. They endure, yes, but at what cost? Bjorn's loneliness, Rylanor's millennia spent waiting for a single moment of vengeance, Tiberius's careful balance that could fail at any awakening. All of these underscore that being a dreadnought, no matter how legendary, is still a form of torment. The machine preserves the body and extends existence far beyond natural limits, but it cannot provide what makes life worth living. It cannot restore the simple pleasures of mortal existence, cannot give back the humanity that was stripped away when the pilot was first sealed in his tomb of metal. Even the greatest heroes, it seems, discover that eternal service is a burden rather than a blessing, that duty without end is a curse dressed in the language of honor. But if existence as a loyalist dreadnought is a slow descent into madness and isolation, then existence as a chaos dreadnought is an immediate plunge into nightmare. For those space marines who turn traitor, who follow their primarchs into damnation, or who are corrupted by the insidious whispers of chaos in the millennia after the heresy, interment in a dreadnought becomes not an honor but a punishment, a torment deliberately inflicted on those who have displeased their masters. The transformation begins during the Horus heresy itself, when the traitor legions gradually lost access to the technological infrastructure that had sustained them during the Great Crusade. Without the forges of Mars producing new components, without the tech priests who understood the intricate maintenance procedures, the dreadnoughts of the traitor legions began to deteriorate. Worst of all, without access to stasis technology, these dreadnoughts could not be put to sleep between battles. Their pilots remained conscious, trapped in their sarcophagi, experiencing every moment of the 10,000 years since the heresy's failure. Try to imagine this existence. 10,000 years of wakefulness, sealed in a coffin of metal, unable to move, unable to interact with the world except through mechanical sensors, unable to die. The Chaos Space Marines who maintain these ancient machines do not care about the sanity or well-being of the pilots. Indeed, madness is often considered a blessing of their patron gods. And so the dreadnoughts of chaos endure, consciousness without rest, awareness without escape, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. The result is predictable and horrifying. Almost without exception, chaos dreadnoughts descend into complete insanity. Their minds fragment under the unendurable strain, their personalities dissolving into raving madness. Some hear voices, the whispers of demons, or the echoes of their own fragmented thoughts. Others become trapped in loops, repeating the same actions or words endlessly, their neural pathways worn into grooves by millennia of repetition. A few retain enough awareness to understand what has happened to them, and these are perhaps the most tragic of all, conscious of their own madness, but powerless to halt its progression. But chaos does not merely drive its dreadnoughts mad through temporal torment. The warp itself, that roiling dimension of psychic energy and demonic malevolence, reaches into the pilot's sarcophagi and works direct corruption upon their remaining flesh. Some dreadnoughts find their organic components mutating, their bodies transforming within their sealed tombs into twisted parodies of human form. Others experience fusion between flesh and machine, the distinction between biological and mechanical components blurring until it becomes impossible to say where the pilot ends and the dreadnought begins. This fusion process creates the Hellbrutes, perhaps the most disturbing variant of Chaos Dreadnought. A Hellbrute is no longer a warrior piloting a machine. It is a single entity, part flesh and part metal, the pilot's consciousness merged with the Dreadnought's systems in a way that transcends mere neural interfacing. The exterior of a Hellbrute often shows signs of this transformation. Armor plates that appear to be made of demonic flesh rather than metal, weapons that seem to have grown from the chassis rather than being mounted on it, vents and exhausts that leak not coolant, but blood or bile. The creation of new Hellbrutes is even more horrifying than the corruption of existing dreadnoughts. The Chaos Space Marines have developed specialized sarcophagi that are designed from the outset to induce this flesh-metal fusion. These pseudo-parasitic systems actively encourage the melding of organic and mechanical components, creating fresh Hellbrutes from recently fallen Chaos Marines, rather than waiting for existing dreadnoughts to undergo natural corruption. The process is agonizing beyond description, the pilot experiencing every moment as his flesh rebels against itself, transforming into something that should not exist. All Hellbrutes are completely insane. This is not a gradual decline like loyalist dreadnoughts experience. It is immediate and total. The trauma of the transformation, combined with the constant whispers of chaos and the horror of their own existence, shatters whatever sanity the pilot possessed. Hellbrutes are kept in chains between battles, secured with heavy shackles, and warded with runes to prevent them from attacking their own allies. When unleashed, they charge into combat with mindless fury, tearing apart anything in their path, with no regard for tactics or self-preservation. Some Chaos warbands use their Hellbrutes as shock troops, releasing them at critical moments to overwhelm enemy positions through sheer ferocity. Others deploy them as terror weapons, the sight of a raving, demon-touched war machine, often breaking enemy morale before a shot is fired. And a few Chaos Lords use Hellbrutes as a form of execution for failures. Condemning a Marine who has displeased them to interment in a Hellbrute sarcophagus is considered one of the most terrible fates that can befall a Chaos Space Marine. Not all Chaos Dreadnoughts become Hellbrutes. Some, particularly those interred during the heresy in older patterns like the Contemptor, retain enough of their original form and function to be classified as Ferrum Infernus Dreadnoughts rather than Hellbrutes. These machines are relics, irreplaceable chassis that the Chaos Space Marines maintain as carefully as their limited resources allow. The pilots of these ancient machines vary widely in their mental states. Some have become veterans of 10,000 years of warfare, their sanity preserved by sheer force of will or by the favor of their patron god. Others have descended into madness indistinguishable from that of Hellbrutes, kept functional only by the superior construction of their sarcophagi. Among the Ferrum Infernus variants, the most feared is the Sonic Dreadnought, deployed exclusively by Emperor's children and other warbands dedicated to Slaanesh. These machines are armed with sonic weaponry that doesn't merely kill, but assaults the senses, creating harmonics that rupture organs, liquefy bone, and drive victims mad with pain. Only Noise Marines, those Chaos Space Marines who have sacrificed all normal sensation in pursuit of ever greater stimulation, can be trusted to pilot Sonic Dreadnoughts. The sensory overload of operating such weapons would drive any other pilot instantly insane, but the Noise Marines welcome it, finding in the cacophony a pleasure that transcends their degraded capacity for normal feeling. Specialized patterns developed during the heresy add further variety to Chaos Dreadnought forces. The Mhara Gal, created by the Wordbearers, was the first dreadnought to be completely possessed by a demon, its pilot's consciousness subsumed by a warp entity that fused with both flesh and machine. The result was a dreadnought that moved with unnatural grace, that wielded psychic powers alongside conventional weapons, and that served as a conduit for demonic energies in a way no other Chaos war machine could match. The World Eaters developed their own variant, the Berserker Dreadnought, for warriors who fell in battle, but whose rage-fueled consciousness could not accept the finality of death. These machines are even more aggressive than standard Hellbrutes, their pilots completely consumed by the mindless fury that Khorne demands of his followers. Armed with close combat weapons and driven by an unquenchable thirst for blood, Berserker Dreadnoughts charge into enemy lines with suicidal abandon, seeking only to kill until they themselves are destroyed. What makes Chaos Dreadnoughts particularly tragic is that many of the pilots were once loyal servants of the Emperor who fought alongside their primarchs during the Great Crusade. They earned their interment through acts of heroism, were promised the same honor that loyalist dreadnoughts receive, and could not have known that their legions would fall to chaos in the years to come. When the heresy erupted, these dreadnoughts faced an impossible choice: remain loyal to their oaths and likely be destroyed by their own legion, or follow their primarchs into damnation. Some made the choice to remain loyal, like Rillanor, and paid for it with millennia of isolation and eventual death. But others, whether through genuine belief in their primarch's cause or simple survival instinct, chose to follow their legions into service to the dark gods. These warriors discovered too late that chaos has no concept of honor, no respect for service, no mercy for the suffering it inflicts. The reward for their loyalty to their fallen primarchs was an existence of unending torment, their minds shattered and their bodies corrupted beyond all recognition of their former glory. In the final analysis, Chaos Dreadnoughts serve as a horrifying mirror to their loyalist counterparts. Where loyalist dreadnoughts at least preserve the pretense of honor and purpose, where they can find some meaning in their service to the Emperor and their chapter, Chaos Dreadnoughts have not even that comfort. They exist in pure torment, kept functional only through the malevolent power of the warp, deployed as weapons or punishments, with no consideration for the consciousness trapped within the machine. They are what every dreadnought fears becoming. Not merely mad, but corrupted, not merely isolated, but damned, their existence transformed from honored service into eternal suffering. Yet despite all the horror, despite the madness and the isolation and the slow erosion of identity, dreadnoughts remain formidable weapons of war. On the battlefield, these walking tombs are terrors to behold, combining the tactical acumen of experienced veterans with firepower that can rival or exceed that of main battle tanks. From the dreadnought pilot's perspective, combat is the only time when existence approaches something bearable. The rush of sensor data, the targeting solutions scrolling across internal displays, the thunder of weapons firing, the satisfying crunch of a power fist crushing enemy armor. These sensations, filtered though they are through mechanical systems, provide stimulation that the long periods of stasis never could. More than that, combat provides purpose. In those moments when the dreadnought is advancing through enemy fire, when tactical decisions must be made in microseconds, when the outcome of battle might hinge on the ancient's actions, the pilot can feel like he is still a space marine rather than merely a weapon. The battlefield awareness of a dreadnought pilot is extraordinary. Fed by multiple sensor arrays, thermal imaging, motion tracking, and sophisticated targeting systems, the pilot perceives the combat environment in ways that flesh and blood marines cannot match. He sees enemies highlighted by targeting markers, watches ballistic trajectories calculated in real time, tracks ammunition expenditure and energy levels with perfect precision. His view of the battlefield is more comprehensive, more data-rich than any mortal perspective could be. But this enhanced perception comes at a cost. The flood of information can be overwhelming, particularly for newly interred pilots who have not yet learned to filter and prioritize the deluge of data. Some dreadnoughts become paralyzed by analysis, their minds struggling to process the sheer volume of tactical information available to them. Others suffer from sensory overload, their consciousness fragmenting under the assault of input from dozens of different systems simultaneously demanding attention. Experienced pilots learn to manage this information flow, developing mental frameworks that allow them to focus on relevant data while filtering out the rest. They learn which sensors to rely on in different tactical situations, how to balance awareness of the immediate combat environment with broader strategic considerations, when to trust their human intuition over the machine's calculated, optimal responses. This learning process can take decades, but once mastered, it allows the dreadnought to function as a supremely effective combat platform. The tactical role of dreadnoughts varies based on their armament and the specific mission parameters. Those equipped with long-range weapons like lascannons or missile launchers often serve as fire support, standing off from the main engagement and systematically destroying high-value targets. Their thick armor allows them to weather return fire that would force lighter vehicles to seek cover, while their sophisticated targeting systems ensure accurate fire even at extreme ranges. Close combat configured dreadnoughts serve a very different role. Armed with power fists, chain fists, or other melee weapons, they advance alongside assault units, using their heavy armor to shield lighter troops from enemy fire. When they reach the enemy lines, they become devastating close-quarters combatants, their enormous melee weapons capable of tearing through armor, crushing bones, and pulverizing fortifications. A dreadnought power fist hits with many tons of force, backed by hydraulic systems that can exert pressure measured in megapascals. What it strikes, it destroys, whether that target is enemy infantry, light vehicles, or hardened, defensive structures. But perhaps the most significant tactical advantage dreadnoughts provide is their psychological impact. The sight of a dreadnought advancing through incoming fire, its armor shrugging off shots that would cripple lesser machines, its weapons roaring death at anything in its path, is terrifying to behold. Enemy morale often breaks before the dreadnought even reaches their lines, soldiers fleeing in panic from what appears to be an unstoppable engine of destruction. For Space Marines fighting alongside dreadnoughts, the psychological effect is equally powerful, but in the opposite direction. To see one of their chapter's ancients stride into battle is deeply inspiring, a tangible reminder of the chapter's heritage and history. The fact that this warrior was deemed too valuable to release from service, that he continues to fight centuries or millennia after his mortal body failed, speaks to the importance of duty and sacrifice that defines the Astartes. Young Marines fight harder in the presence of a dreadnought, unwilling to show weakness before a hero who has already given everything in service to the Emperor. Famous battles throughout Imperial history feature dreadnoughts as pivotal actors. During the Battle of Prospero, when the Space Wolves brought sanction to the Thousand Suns, dreadnoughts were instrumental in breaching the psychic defenses of the Sefstidi Legion. Bjorn himself fought in this campaign, his massive frame wading through sorcerous fire to crush traitor psykers beneath his weapons. The Siege of Terra saw dreadnoughts on both sides of the conflict, loyalist ancients defending the Imperial Palace against the traitor hordes, while Chaos dreadnoughts hammered at the walls alongside their fallen brothers. More recently, during the Plague Wars on Ultramar, Redemptor dreadnoughts played crucial roles in containing Nurgle's corruption. Their ability to advance through contaminated zones that would kill normal Marines, their firepower capable of eliminating swarms of plague-bearing cultists and demon engines, made them invaluable in the grinding warfare that characterized that conflict. Malcades, the first Primaris Marine to fall in Ultramar, continued fighting as a Redemptor, even as the machine slowly burned out his already failing body, his sacrifice buying time for his brothers to secure critical objectives. Yet even in these moments of glory, even when dreadnoughts turn the tide of desperate battles and earn fresh laurels for their chapters, the pilots experience combat through a filter of mechanical detachment that diminishes the satisfaction they might once have felt. The rush of adrenaline that would flood a flesh-and-blood Marine system is muted or absent entirely. The feeling of triumph at victory is intellectual rather than visceral, acknowledged but not truly felt. Even the pain of taking hits that damage the dreadnought systems is translated into diagnostic readouts rather than the immediate sensation of injury. Some pilots, particularly those who have been interred for extended periods, report that combat has become almost routine. The tactical decisions come automatically, weapons fire and target selection executed with mechanical precision that requires no conscious thought. They find themselves fighting on autopilot, their consciousness strangely disconnected from the violence they are perpetrating, as if they are watching themselves fight rather than actively participating in combat. This dissociation is deeply troubling when it occurs, a sign that the pilot's mind is beginning to separate from both the machine he inhabits and the person he once was. And when the battle ends, when the enemies are destroyed or routed, and the objective secured, the Dreadnought pilot faces the return to inactivity that he has learned to dread. The stimulation of combat fades, replaced by the dead calm of his sarcophagus. He will be marched back to the transport, loaded aboard with the other equipment, and returned to the fortress monastery. The tech priests will perform their post-battle diagnostics, repairing any damage sustained and replenishing ammunition stores. The chaplain will offer words of praise and blessing, and then, inevitably, the pilot will be returned to his alcove in the deep halls and put back into stasis. For some dreadnoughts, particularly those like Murderfang, who have descended into pure aggression, this transition from combat to storage is unbearable. They resist being powered down, their weapons cycling threateningly even as their own brothers attempt to secure them. In extreme cases, dreadnoughts have had to be forcibly sedated with chemical agents pumped directly into their amniotic fluid, their thrashing slowly subsiding as the drugs take effect. These scenes are disturbing to witness, the mighty ancient reduced to a raging beast that must be chemically restrained for the safety of all concerned. Even for more stable pilots, the end of combat brings a return to the isolation and disconnection that defines most of their existence. The brief period of purpose and activity gives way to the prospect of more stasis, more lost time, more awakenings in a future where everyone they knew will be dead and the chapter will have moved on without them. It is no wonder that some dreadnoughts begin to see combat as the only thing that makes their existence bearable, developing an addiction to war that makes them volunteer for increasingly dangerous deployments, rather than face the alternative of long periods in stasis. When dreadnoughts are not deployed in combat, they reside in specialized chambers deep within their chapter's fortress monastery. These halls serve as both storage facility and mausoleum, housing the slumbering ancients in conditions designed to preserve both the machines and the pilots within them for as long as possible. The physical environment of these chambers is carefully controlled. Temperature is maintained at levels that minimize power drain from life support systems while preventing the formation of ice crystals in the amniotic fluid. Humidity is regulated to prevent corrosion of mechanical components. Air circulation is designed to prevent the buildup of dust and contaminants that might infiltrate the sarcophagi's seals. Every detail of the environment has been optimized over centuries or millennia of experience, the tech priests applying hard-won knowledge to ensure the ancients' preservation. Each dreadnought stands in its designated alcove, secured in place by docking clamps and connected to power feeds that maintain the sarcophagus's systems during stasis. The machines are arrayed in rows, their imposing forms creating corridors of silent sentinels that stretch into the dimness of the vast chamber. Some fortress monasteries house dozens of dreadnoughts in a single chamber. Others maintain separate vaults for different eras or patterns. The oldest and most venerable kept in special alcoves that receive additional protections and monitoring. The atmosphere in these chambers is one of profound stillness. The only sounds are the soft hum of power generators, the quiet cycling of environmental systems, and the occasional click or beep of status monitors performing automated checks. No voices disturb the silence. No footsteps echo through the halls except when tech priests arrive to perform maintenance or when a dreadnought is being prepared for awakening. For the pilots sealed within their sarcophagi, existence during these periods of storage is difficult to describe. When the stasis field is active, consciousness simply ceases. There are no dreams, no thoughts, no awareness of the passage of time. The pilot's last conscious moment before stasis might be the conclusion of a battle, the tech priest's voice announcing the initiation of stasis protocols, the sensation of consciousness fading. His next conscious moment will be awakening, which might occur hours, days, years, or centuries later, with no subjective awareness of the interval between. Some dreadnoughts, Particularly, the very ancient, or those whose sarcophagus systems are deteriorating, do not achieve full stasis. Instead, they drift in a twilight state of minimal consciousness, aware that time is passing but unable to interact with anything, their thoughts moving with glacial slowness through the fog of semi-stasis. These periods can be profoundly disturbing, the pilot experiencing something like sensory deprivation while remaining conscious enough to be aware of his isolation. When such dreadnoughts are finally awakened, they often report disturbing experiences during their sleep: fragmented dreams, phantom sensations, hallucinations born of minimal neural activity interacting with the machine's systems in unpredictable ways. There are even unconfirmed reports of dreadnoughts in stasis, somehow communicating with each other, their consciousnesses reaching out through the shared network of power feeds and monitoring systems to make contact with fellow ancients. These accounts describe vast dreamscapes populated by the sleeping pilots, spaces where they can interact as they once did when they possessed flesh and blood bodies, where they can speak without voxcasters and touch without weapon mounts serving as crude approximations of hands. Whether these experiences are genuine psychic phenomena, glitches in the sarcophagus systems creating shared hallucinations, or simply wishful thinking on the part of isolated pilots desperate for any form of connection, remains unclear. The awakening ceremony itself is a solemn ritual that varies by chapter, but generally follows similar patterns. Tech priests arrive first to run diagnostic checks, ensuring that all systems are functioning within acceptable parameters before the stasis field is deactivated. They verify that the amniotic fluid has not degraded, that neural interfaces remain properly connected, that the dreadnought's weapons and motive systems are ready for activation. Any maintenance issues discovered during these checks are resolved before awakening proceeds, as activating a dreadnought with faulty systems could result in the pilot's death or, worse, his entombment in a non-functional shell. When the tech priests certify that the dreadnought is ready for activation, a chaplain or other ranking member of the chapter arrives to perform the spiritual aspects of the ceremony. He recites prayers of awakening, calls upon the Emperor to bless the ancient's return to service, and reminds the pilot, though he cannot yet hear, of his duties and oaths. These words serve multiple purposes. They reaffirm the sacred nature of the dreadnought's service, frame the awakening as a holy event rather than merely a mechanical procedure, and prepare any assembled Marines to receive the ancient with appropriate reverence. The actual moment of awakening is marked by the deactivation of the stasis field. Power levels change, system monitors shift from standby to active status, and somewhere deep within the sarcophagus, consciousness begins to return to the sleeping pilot. This process is not instantaneous. The transition from stasis to full awareness can take anywhere from minutes to hours, depending on how long the pilot has been asleep and the condition of his neural interface. For the pilot, awakening brings disorientation and confusion. Memory of the events leading to his last period of stasis may be hazy or absent entirely. His sense of time is completely unreliable. He cannot tell whether he has been asleep for days or decades. The flood of sensory data as his neural interface reconnects with the dreadnought's systems can be overwhelming. Dozens of status indicators and sensor feeds demanding his attention before he has fully regained consciousness. Tech priests monitor this awakening closely, ready to intervene if the pilot shows signs of distress or confusion that might indicate neural damage or system malfunction. They speak to him through the Vox channels, their voices cutting through the confusion of reawakening to provide anchors of familiarity. They tell him where he is, what year it is, why he has been awakened. This information is crucial for orienting the confused pilot, giving him the context he needs to begin making sense of his situation. The chaplain then speaks directly to the awakened ancient, addressing him by name and rank, reminding him of his identity and his place within the chapter. This personal address serves to ground the pilot's sense of self, reinforcing that he is still a person, still a valued member of the chapter. still remembered and needed. For dreadnoughts who have been in stasis for extended periods, this reassurance can be emotionally powerful, a reminder that they have not been forgotten despite the passage of years or decades. Once the pilot has regained full consciousness and orientation, he is briefed on the current situation. If he has been awakened for combat, he receives tactical briefings on the enemy, the mission objectives, and the forces he will be fighting alongside. If he has been awakened to provide counsel, he is informed of the situation requiring his wisdom and given time to consider his response. In either case, the chapter takes pains to ensure that the ancient understands why his service is needed, making clear that his awakening is not arbitrary, but a response to genuine necessity. These awakening ceremonies represent some of the only social interaction many dreadnought pilots experience. The familiar voices of tech priests and chaplains, the knowledge that there are still living Marines who remember his name and value his service, the sense of being needed and welcomed back. All of these provide crucial psychological support to pilots who spend most of their existence in isolation. Chapters that neglect these rituals, that treat awakenings as purely mechanical procedures, often find their dreadnoughts deteriorating more rapidly, their pilots succumbing to despair or confusion without the anchors of identity and purpose that proper ceremonies provide. The emotional toll on the chapter should not be underestimated either. For the Marines who perform these awakenings, there is always the knowledge that the ancient they are reviving has sacrificed everything to continue serving. They look at the towering dreadnought and know that within its armored shell is a brother who can never again know the simple pleasures they still enjoy, who has paid a price beyond calculation for the privilege of continued service. This knowledge weighs heavily on those who must make the decision to awaken a dreadnought. The chapter leadership, aware that every activation brings the ancient one step closer to eventual madness or system failure. And for the dreadnoughts themselves, each awakening is a reminder of what they have lost and what they can never regain. They wake to find the world changed, their brothers aged or dead. The chapter evolved in ways both large and small. They must reorient themselves to a reality that has moved on without them, reassemble their sense of purpose, and prepare to serve once more, despite the knowledge that this service will eventually return them to the darkness of stasis. It is a cycle of loss and renewal that repeats endlessly, each iteration taking another small piece of the pilot's sanity and humanity until there is nothing left but the machine and its programming. The question of whether dreadnought interment truly represents an honor or merely masquerades as one while delivering a curse is one that has no simple answer. The official position of every loyalist Space Marine chapter is unambiguous. To be chosen for dreadnought interment is the highest honor that can be bestowed, a sacred privilege that allows a fallen hero to continue serving the Emperor long after his mortal body has failed. This narrative is reinforced through ritual, tradition, and the public veneration accorded to dreadnoughts whenever they make appearances. From a purely practical standpoint, there are arguments supporting this position. Dreadnoughts do continue to serve, often for centuries or millennia beyond their original lifespan. The tactical knowledge and combat experience they accumulate is genuinely valuable, providing insights that young Marines cannot match. When properly deployed and maintained, a dreadnought represents a significant combat asset, capable of turning the tide of battles and inspiring nearby forces to greater acts of valor. More importantly, from the chapter's perspective, dreadnoughts serve as living links to the past. In an Imperium where records are often fragmentary, where history has been lost or deliberately obscured, where the passage of 10,000 years has erased much of what was once known, a dreadnought who participated in those ancient events can provide testimony that no written record can match. When Bjorn speaks of the Great Crusade or the Horus Heresy, he speaks from personal experience, offering perspectives that would otherwise be lost forever. The symbolic value of dreadnoughts cannot be dismissed either. They represent the chapter's commitment to never abandoning its heroes, to honoring sacrifice with continued service, rather than allowing worthy warriors to simply die. This message resonates with all Space Marines, reinforcing the bonds of brotherhood and the understanding that their chapter will value them even when their bodies fail. The knowledge that the chapter will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve its greatest warriors, that death in battle is not necessarily the end of service, can strengthen morale and reinforce unit cohesion. But these practical and symbolic benefits accrue primarily to the chapter as an institution, rather than to the individual Marine who is interred. From the pilot's perspective, the calculation looks very different. What the chapter calls honor, the pilot experiences as isolation. What the chapter frames as sacred duty, the pilot endures as a form of imprisonment. What the chapter describes as eternal service, the pilot knows as endless torment punctuated by brief intervals of purpose. The lore contains accounts of Space Marines who explicitly refused Dreadnought interment when offered. During the Solar War, an Imperial Fists Marine badly wounded while fighting alongside Sigismund declined the dubious honor of becoming a Dreadnought, choosing instead to accept death and whatever peace might follow. His reasons were not recorded in detail, but the mere fact that he refused suggests he understood something about the reality of Dreadnought existence that the official rhetoric glosses over. How common such refusals are is difficult to determine. Chapters do not publicize when heroes decline interment, as it would undermine the narrative of Dreadnought service as a privilege eagerly accepted by all worthy warriors. It is quite possible that many more Marines would refuse if given a genuine choice. But the combination of cultural pressure, indoctrination from their earliest days as neophytes, and the fact that most candidates are too badly injured to make informed decisions means that refusals remain rare. The question also arises of whether the Imperium's religious framework around dreadnoughts represents genuine belief or sophisticated propaganda designed to make an expedient practice seem noble. The chapters need dreadnoughts for practical reasons. They are powerful weapons, valuable repositories of knowledge, and symbols of continuity in an Imperium where little endures unchanged. By framing interment as the highest honor rather than what it actually is, a method of extracting continued service from warriors who should be allowed to rest, the chapters ensure a steady supply of pilots willing to undergo the procedure. This interpretation may seem cynical, but it aligns with broader patterns in Imperial culture where the needs of institutions consistently override individual welfare, where the language of honor and duty serves to make exploitation palatable. The entire Space Marine program operates on this principle, taking boys and transforming them into weapons, stripping away much of their humanity in the process, all while framing this as a glorious opportunity to serve the Emperor. Dreadnought interment simply extends this logic to its ultimate conclusion, extracting service even from those whose bodies have utterly failed. What makes this particularly insidious is that the pilots themselves often believe in the honor narrative, at least initially. They have been conditioned since childhood to value duty above all else, to see service to the Emperor as the highest purpose any human can aspire to achieve. When told that they can continue this service despite catastrophic injury, many genuinely welcome the opportunity, not fully understanding what they are agreeing to only later after years, or centuries of isolation and deterioration. Do some begin to question whether what they were given was truly an honor or a curse dressed in ceremonial language. The few dreadnoughts who have served long enough to gain perspective on their condition sometimes express deeply ambivalent views. Bjorn's bitterness is well documented. His anger at Layman Russ's departure, inseparable from his resentment at being left to endure millennia of service that no one should have to bear. Other long-serving dreadnoughts speak of their existence in terms that mix pride in their accomplishments with sorrow for what they have lost, satisfaction at continued service with weariness at its seemingly endless duration. Perhaps the most honest assessment comes from those dreadnoughts who acknowledge that their service benefits the chapter, but destroys the pilot. They recognize that what they do is valuable, that their continued existence serves important purposes, but they also understand that this service comes at a price that no amount of honor or glory can truly repay. They serve because they have committed to serve, because their oaths and conditioning give them no real alternative. But they do so with full awareness that they are sacrificing their sanity, their humanity, and ultimately themselves for the benefit of an institution that will endure long after they finally achieve the rest of true death. In the final analysis, whether Dreadnought interment is an honor or a curse depends largely on perspective and time frame. In the immediate aftermath of interment, when the pilot still remembers who he was and finds purpose in his continued service, it might genuinely feel like an honor. Decades or centuries later, when isolation has begun to erode his sanity and he has watched everyone he knew crumble to dust, the curse becomes more apparent. And for those few who endure for millennia, who have lost so much of themselves that they can barely remember what it meant to be human, the question becomes almost meaningless. They simply are, neither honored nor cursed, but merely existing in a state beyond such human categorizations. What cannot be denied is that the practice serves the Imperium's interests far more than the individual pilot's welfare, that it perpetuates a system where suffering is reframed as glory and exploitation is disguised as honor. In this, Dreadnoughts represent in microcosm everything that is wrong with the Imperium. Its willingness to sacrifice individuals for institutional benefit, its use of religious and cultural conditioning to make intolerable burdens seem like privileges, its fundamental inability to allow anyone, even its greatest heroes, to simply rest. Eventually, all Dreadnoughts fall silent. Whether through catastrophic combat damage, irreparable mechanical failure, or simply the accumulated deterioration of organic components that no life support system can indefinitely prevent, every ancient ultimately reaches the end of his service. These deaths, when they finally come, often carry a sense of release rather than tragedy. The pilot's consciousness finally escaping a prison that has held it for far too long. Combat deaths are the most common and, in many ways, the most merciful. A dreadnought destroyed in battle dies fighting, his consciousness extinguished in an instant as critical damage overwhelms the sarcophagus's protections. There is no prolonged suffering, no drawn-out deterioration. One moment the pilot is engaged in combat, his weapons firing, his tactical awareness focused on the immediate threats. The next moment, a penetrating hit breaches the sarcophagus, and consciousness simply ceases. For pilots who have endured centuries of service, this kind of death can seem almost like a reward, a final deployment from which there will be no return to stasis, no more awakenings in a future where everything has changed, no further erosion of identity and memory. Some dreadnoughts, particularly those who have begun to lose their grip on sanity, actively seek such deaths, volunteering for the most dangerous missions, or positioning themselves in the most exposed positions during combat. These are not suicide missions in any conventional sense. The Dreadnought fights with full effectiveness, serving the chapter's tactical objectives with the experience and skill accumulated over long service. But there is perhaps less concern for self-preservation than a pilot who wishes to continue might display. When a Dreadnought falls in combat, the chapter's immediate priority is to recover the sarcophagus, if at all possible. These shells contain not only the remains of a valued brother, but also precious technological components that cannot easily be replaced. Combat doctrine across most chapters includes specific protocols for Dreadnought recovery, with designated units tasked with retrieving fallen ancients even from the most contested battlefields. The risk involved in these recovery operations can be substantial, but most chapters consider it worthwhile, both to honor the fallen ancient and to preserve the irreplaceable machinery. If recovery succeeds, the sarcophagus is transported back to the fortress monastery with all the ceremony accorded to a fallen hero. Tech priests carefully open the armored tomb, revealing what remains of the pilot within. After centuries of service, what they find often bears little resemblance to a human form. A shrunken, desiccated husk, suspended in amniotic fluid, or in the case of redemptors and leviathans, sometimes nothing but blackened organs and dissolved tissue. These remains are treated with reverence regardless of their condition, prepared for final rites according to the chapter's traditions. The funeral ceremonies for dreadnoughts often surpass those held for even the highest-ranking chapter officers. An entire company, or sometimes the full chapter, might assemble to honor the ancients' final rest, their voices raised in dirges and hymns, commemorating the fallen warriors' deeds. The chaplain recites the ancients' history, listing battles fought, enemies destroyed, campaigns where his wisdom proved crucial. For dreadnoughts who have served for extended periods, this recitation can take hours, a litany of service that stretches across centuries and touches on some of the most significant events in the chapter's history. The remains are then interred according to chapter custom. Some chapters cremate the body and place the ashes in urns within their halls of remembrance. Others conduct burials in sacred ground, the ancient's resting place marked with monuments that detail his service. A few chapters preserve the remains in stasis crypts, maintaining them in perpetuity alongside other heroes of the chapter's past. In all cases, the sarcophagus itself is typically preserved separately, either returned to service with a new pilot if it remains functional, or consecrated and placed in a position of honor if it is too damaged for reuse. For the chapter, the death of a dreadnought represents a significant loss. Beyond the practical considerations of losing a combat asset and repository of knowledge, there is genuine grief for a brother who has finally laid down his burdens. Young Marines who fought alongside the ancient mourn a mentor and inspiration. Veterans who knew him before his interment, if any still live, mourn the final passing of a friend from an earlier era. The chapter master mourns the loss of counsel and wisdom that cannot be replaced. But for those who understand what the ancient endured, there may be a measure of relief mixed with the grief. The pilot's suffering has finally ended. He will experience no more isolation, no further deterioration of his mind, no additional centuries of existence in the liminal space between life and death. Whatever afterlife awaits, whatever peace or oblivion lies beyond consciousness, he has finally been permitted to experience it. In the Imperium's grim calculus, where service is eternal and rest is a luxury few can afford, true death becomes a gift rather than a tragedy. Not all dreadnought deaths occur in combat. Some ancients simply fail, their organic components deteriorating despite all efforts to preserve them, their consciousness fading as neural pathways degrade beyond the point where even sophisticated interface systems can compensate. These deaths are often discovered during routine activation procedures. The tech priests initiate awakening protocols only to find that consciousness does not return, that the signals flowing through neural interfaces produce no response, that the ancient who slumbered has passed beyond the ability of any technology to recall. These quiet deaths in the darkness of the stasis chambers carry their own particular tragedy. The pilot experiences no final battle, earns no last glory, simply ceases to exist without ever knowing his end has come. There is no opportunity for final words, no chance to share. Accumulated wisdom one last time. The ancient is simply gone, discovered only when the chapter has need of his service and finds that service can no longer be rendered. When such deaths are discovered, the response is often more muted than for combat casualties. The chapter still performs the appropriate rituals, still honors the ancient's memory and long service, but there is a sense of something left incomplete, of a story that ended between pages rather than at a satisfying conclusion. Some chapters view these deaths as failures of maintenance or monitoring, subjecting their tech priests to intensive review to determine if the loss could have been prevented. Others accept them as inevitable, the final consequence of attempting to preserve consciousness far beyond natural limits. The most disturbing deaths are those of dreadnoughts who have descended so far into madness that they can no longer be safely awakened. These ancients remain in stasis until their organic components fail, their consciousness trapped in a state of permanent sleep from which they will never wake. They exist in a twilight state, neither alive in any meaningful sense nor fully dead, their sarcophagi humming with minimal power while they slowly deteriorate. Some chapters eventually make the difficult decision to deactivate life support for these irretrievably mad ancients, framing it as granting the Emperor's peace to those who can no longer serve. Others maintain them indefinitely in stasis, unwilling to deliberately end the life of a loyal servant, even when that life has become meaningless. Regardless of how death comes, regardless of whether it arrives amid the thunder of battle or in the silent darkness of a stasis chamber, the end of a Dreadnought's service marks a moment of profound significance for the chapter. It represents the final closing of a chapter in the chapter's own history, the permanent loss of a connection to battles long past and wisdom accumulated over centuries. But it also represents, for the pilot who has finally been released, the end of a burden that should never have been borne for as long as it was. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, death becomes the ultimate rest, the final reward for service that has stretched far beyond any reasonable expectation. And so the chapters mourn their fallen ancients, not only for what has been lost, but also, perhaps, for what has finally been granted. The peace that was denied for so long, the rest that should have come centuries ago, the release from duty that continues beyond all human endurance. The practice of interring wounded warriors in dreadnoughts reveals fundamental truths about the Imperium and the price it demands from those who serve it. On the surface, it represents humanity's refusal to surrender, the determination to extract continued service, even from the broken and dying. But beneath this veneer of noble perseverance lies something far darker, a willingness to inflict suffering in service of institutional needs, to trap consciousness in metal tombs and call it honor, to deny even the basic mercy of death to those who have already given everything. Dreadnoughts embody the Imperium's foundational philosophy that the individual exists solely to serve, that personal welfare is always subordinate to collective benefit, that there are no limits to what can be demanded in the name of duty. The Space Marine who is offered Dreadnought interment has already sacrificed his humanity by accepting gene seed modification, sacrificed his childhood by submitting to brutal training, sacrificed any hope of a normal life by taking the oaths of an Astartes. Now he is asked for one final sacrifice, to surrender even the dignity of death, to continue serving long after his body has failed and his mind begins to unravel. And he accepts because he has been conditioned to accept, because his entire existence has prepared him for this moment, because the alternative of refusing would require questioning assumptions so fundamental that they might as well be questions about the nature of reality itself. He accepts, and in accepting becomes another example held up to future generations. See how our heroes serve. See how they continue fighting even when their bodies are destroyed. See how duty transcends even death itself. This is the true horror of dreadnoughts, not the physical transformation or the isolation or even the madness that eventually comes, but the way the Imperium has constructed a system where such suffering is not only accepted but celebrated, where the victims of institutional cruelty are presented as paragons of virtue, where the warriors who endure the longest torment are those most highly honored. The technology that makes dreadnoughts possible is a relic of an earlier age when humanity reached for the stars and achieved wonders. But the Imperium of the 41st Millennium has taken this miraculous technology and perverted it into an instrument of exploitation, using it not to heal but to perpetuate suffering, not to restore but to imprison. The fact that this exploitation is dressed in religious language, sanctified by ritual, and reinforced by tradition does not make it less cruel. It only makes the cruelty more insidious, harder to recognize and resist. Yet there is something admirable, perhaps even noble, in the Dreadnoughts who endure despite understanding the truth of their condition. Warriors like Bjorn, who serve for millennia, fully aware that they are trapped, that their existence is a form of torment, that they will likely descend into madness before the end, but who continue serving anyway because the alternative is to abandon the chapter they have fought for across the centuries. There is a tragic grandeur in such dedication, a testament to the strength of will required to continue choosing duty when every awakening brings fresh reasons to refuse. These Dreadnoughts, the lucid ones who understand their condition but serve regardless, perhaps deserve the title of heroes more than those who accept their fate without comprehension. They make their sacrifice with open eyes, knowing exactly what it will cost them, and they do it anyway because something in them insists that the chapter, the Imperium, the Emperor's dream of humanity's ascendancy, is worth preserving even at such terrible personal cost. But we should not romanticize their suffering. We should not let the nobility of their sacrifice obscure the cruelty of a system that demands such sacrifice in the first place. The Imperium could choose to let its wounded warriors die with dignity. It could choose to preserve their knowledge through other means, through written records, through teaching future generations before death comes, through technologies that don't require imprisoning consciousness in metal shells. It could choose mercy. Instead, it chooses Dreadnoughts. It chooses to extract every last measure of service, to wring value from broken bodies and deteriorating minds until there is nothing left to harvest. And it does so while framing this extraction as an honor, while telling the victims that they should be grateful for the opportunity to suffer endlessly in service to an institution that will forget them the moment they cease to be useful. This is the true face of the Imperium, not the bold declarations of humanity's manifest destiny, not the soaring rhetoric about the Emperor's divine plan, but the quiet horror of a Dreadnought awakening in his sarcophagus to discover that everyone he knew is dead, and that he must serve again, despite having already given more than anyone should be asked to give. It is the reality behind the propaganda, the truth that the ceremonial language and ritual trappings are designed to obscure. And yet, for all this darkness, for all the cruelty and exploitation and systematic denial of mercy, the Dreadnoughts endure. They fight, they serve, they preserve knowledge and provide tactical wisdom and inspire younger Marines to heights of valor. Some maintain their sanity for centuries or even millennia. Others descend into madness, but continue functioning as weapons until mechanical failure or enemy action finally grants release. They are, in the end, neither heroes nor victims, but something more complex, casualties of a civilization that has forgotten how to value individuals over institutions, prisoners who have internalized their captors' ideology so thoroughly that they cannot imagine escape, and warriors whose dedication to duty transcends even the horror of their circumstances. They are what the Imperium makes of its finest servants, and in their suffering, we see reflected the true cost of humanity's survival in the grim darkness of the far future. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of the most tragic aspects of Warhammer 40k lore. The Dreadnoughts represent so much of what makes this universe compelling. The intersection of nobility and horror, the question of where duty becomes exploitation, the price of survival in a galaxy that offers no easy answers or comfortable victories. These walking tombs remind us that in the 41st millennium, even death is not necessarily an escape. That service can continue long past the point where it becomes torment, and that the Imperium's greatest heroes are often those who have suffered most in its service. They stand as monuments to dedication carried to its ultimate extreme, and as warnings about the dangers of systems that value function over welfare, duty over mercy, institutional benefit over individual dignity. Whether you see Dreadnoughts as tragic figures deserving of pity, as inspiring examples of selfless service, or as cautionary tales about the cost of endless war, they remain some of the most compelling and complex elements of the Warhammer 40k universe. Their stories of endurance and deterioration, of service and sacrifice, of honor and horror intertwined, give us windows into a civilization where such contradictions have become normalized, where the exceptional has become routine, and where the unthinkable has become policy. If you enjoyed this exploration of Dreadnought lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives into the grim darkness of the far future. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Dreadnought interment as an honor or a curse? Which legendary ancient do you find most compelling? What aspects of Dreadnought lore would you like to see explored in future videos? Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, not even in death. The duty never ends, the service continues, and the price of survival is measured in the suffering of those who serve. The Emperor protects, but sometimes what we need protection from is the price the Imperium demands for that protection. This has been Stories of Hammer. Thank you for watching.